morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this week's ramsac webinar on introducing our data security framework. Thank you so much to everyone that's joined us live today, or hi to anyone watching this as a post-event recording as well. If you don't know me, my name is Dan May. I'm the Managing Director here at ramsac, and delighted to be joined today by my colleague James Hotol. James is one of our solutions architects and one of our sort of Microsoft specialists here at ramsac. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping. We're recording the call, so we will make the recording available for you afterwards. And please feel free to use the Q&A box if you've got any questions as we go. And we'll run all the way through the slides. And when we get to the end, if there are any questions that we haven't answered as we've gone along, then we'll make sure we pick those up at the end. So, why we're here and what are we talking about? First of all, let's think about why data is such a challenge. I think we can all recognise that in a modern business, data is very much the backbone of our organisation, right? And the rate at which the data we hold has grown is just exponential. Microsoft estimate that over the last 10 years, the rate of growth has been so significant, and 64% of UK businesses are now managing at least 1,000 terabytes of data in Microsoft 365, which is just immense. It's incredible. You know, it's more than we would have ever had when we owned our servers and our backup tapes in our offices. So the amount of data that we store, the amount of access that we all have access to is just unimaginable compared to sort of 3 or 4 years ago. And the fact that we now have unlimited access to data storage in 365 is so cheap, means that it's become almost impossible for a business leader or an office manager to feel truly in control of that data. So if we go back sort of, you know, pre-pandemic, we knew where our data was pre the cloud. You know, we stored our data in file servers. We knew exactly who had access to those file servers, and we knew where they physically were. And external sharing didn't really exist. You know, in file server world, unless you gave people a very specific sort of VPN access in, people just didn't have access to your data outside of the office. So it was very easy. And now as business leaders, we've kind of lost all of that control. I think as well, we store everything. We talk about storing our data in 365, but we get really confused about what that actually means. Where is that? Is that data that is in SharePoint? Have we stored it in Teams? Is it accessible from Loop? Is it in somebody's personal OneDrive? Is it data in Power BI? We've just got data everywhere throughout the 365 estate. We've given individuals in our organisation their own OneDrives. It's just kind of exploded, and gone are the days where we could say, well, I know that sensitive data sits on the P drive of the server, and you know, personal data sits on the C drive or whatever. That's just gone. People are accessing our data from every device, from any location. Also, what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years is we've all got really used to collaborative working. We're routinely collaborating on files externally with third parties, with you know, subcontractors, people outside of our organisation, trustees. And what we've done over those years is we've started sharing files routinely. So, you know, I might have worked with a third-party provider from outside my organisation 3 or 4 years ago, and I created a share on my OneDrive for a particular folder. Well, very, very few people, in fact, I believe nobody, ever goes back and truly audits, well, who did I share that folder with originally? Because I've possibly forgotten that 3 or 4 years ago, I shared this folder with a third-party consultant. I don't work with that consultant anymore, but I've never actually rescinded that sharing. And over the years, I've just added more and more files into that folder. So historical links and oversharing is a real data protection problem, and it's one that, as custodians of data, you know, as business leaders or office managers or GDPR guardians, we've really got to address, because these are all potential data breaches. And then, of course, we've got we've got regulation. Lots of our clients are ISO 27001 regulated, or their cyber essentials regulated, but all of us are regulated by GDPR and the expectations of our customers and our stakeholders. So we've got to be complying with regulation. Every day when we turn on the news, we hear about the latest cyber breach. And of course, we're all on an AI journey. We're all increasing the tools that people are using outside of Microsoft, but also inside Microsoft with tools like Copilot. And we're worried about how that is all controlled. So there's the headache. That's why we've got a problem. What do we do about it? So Ramsac have been looking at this over the last 6 months, and we created our own data security framework. And the data security framework is a 5-step approach to best practice. So this isn't a product in its own right. This isn't a single kind of one-size-fits-all solution, but it's talking about how do we take the physical, previously we talked about physical security. We talked about who's got access to the building, who's got access to the server room, how do we access that? Now that Microsoft 365, now that our 365 tenant is effectively our server, how do we put steps in place to ensure that we've really locked down and taken back control of who's got access to what and reduce that risk of accidental oversharing? So our framework is a 5-step approach. And I'm going to talk less now, and I'm going to bring you into the conversation, James, and just look at each of these 5 steps in order, really, about the approach that we've been taking clients on over the last sort of 12 months, I guess, since we started working on this, and the measures that organisations can put in place, often without having to spend any money on any more tools. This is about really maximising what's already available, but probably not turned on in the Microsoft 365 tenant. So, James, step 1 in our framework is about assessment. What does this mean practically?
Exactly, and this is the starting point. So regardless how you got here, this could have been because of compliance that we've talked about. It could have been that actually we've done a Copilot readiness assessment for you because you're introducing you're keen to introduce these tools, but cautious that actually we've talked about, we've got this explosion of data that's stored all over 365. How can we do that safely and securely? Or it could just simply be that actually, when you migrated to SharePoint, you did a lift and shift, and you picked up what you had maybe from your old file server and moved it up to SharePoint. You've never come back to revisit it. But the starting point is actually doing the assessment stage, and this is the analysis stage here. And really, high level, you can't actually really protect what you don't understand. So what we need to do here first is work with you, and the way that we do that is use some clever tooling from AppPoint. And what we'll do is we'll set that up, and that will scan across your 365 estate. So that's going to look at things like SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, Power BI. And what that's going to do is it's going to help us understand where is your sensitive data stored. And not only that, we need to then look at who's got permissions to it and how you're using links in the organization as well. And it's very hard to do that within some of the 365 environment. You actually need some tooling to help you step back and look at that.
You can't do it manually, can you?
It would be a very difficult job to do it manually, and I think this is why you need something that's a bit more bird's eye, top down, looking at actually your environment here.
I know when we ran this for ourselves and when we've run it for clients, I've looked at the output, and you're talking about thousands of data points, aren't you? Thousands of sharing links, for example.
Exactly. And there's a lot of data that this is going to produce here, but actually, depending on how old your 365 environment is, will it probably determine actually what we're going to find. So if you've got quite a long-standing environment, chances are we're going to find a lot of things here. Potentially a lot of oversharing that's happened over the years where people have just been sharing files in and out as well. So that's going to give us a lot of insight into your current environment to understand where the risks currently are.
So we've done the audit, we get loads and loads of data, and I know that when we do this for clients, we consolidate all of that data into a set of reports. And it's fair to say the client has to do a little bit of work at that point as well, right? There's a there's a spreadsheet of data that says you just need to confirm, are these people all sat in the right bucket? So, there's a classic, isn't there? So we forgot that somebody moved job roles actually 2 years ago, and they've been moved into their new job role, but the previous permissions are still applied. They still access all of the data they had previously. So there is a bit of ramsac sitting with the client and going through the results of that.
It's exactly. So we'll put a report together at the back of this, and also give you some recommendations on where we think the key priorities are and what we should be focusing on next as well.
So that moves into step 2 of this 5-step process, which was essential actions. So what does essential actions look like?
So this is around what are the immediate actions we can take to start improving security and reducing risk. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. And the way we do that will be determined by what we find in the assessment effectively. But we put some examples up on screen here of what they could be. So it could just be as simple as actually we need to do a data cleanup. There, we might have found in the audit, we've got hundreds of team sites that have been created that just aren't used anymore. And this classic kind of team sprawl that you see in a lot of places, maybe we would just want to cull a lot of that. Maybe we want to look at your SharePoint structure with you. Maybe you did a lift and shift. We see a lot where people just pick up what they've got and dump it all into one SharePoint site.
We saw a lot of that in COVID, didn't we? When people were suddenly moving to remote work.
Exactly. And some people have not come back to revisit that. And actually, is it better now we look at separating that out into different SharePoint sites per department? Can we then put more controls in place around that? So that would be a good example. Modifying the default sharing permissions as well. We know that Microsoft's defaults don't always align with best practices. And what I mean by that is by default, if you haven't changed your settings in SharePoint, every time you go to share a file, it creates what's called an organizational link. What that means is you can send that link and anyone in your organization can access that data. So we need to pause here because you think actually that's quite a big risk that we got here. The fact that links are important to acknowledge because links provide direct access to files in SharePoint. And then secondly, by default, even if I just want to share a file with you and I create a link, if you were then to send that on to anyone in the organization, they could also access that file as well. So that's straight away something we can change to make that more restrictive.
And that's the sort of the compromise, isn't it, where Microsoft have this vision of SharePoint, for example, being a place for collaboration. Therefore, their out-of-the-box settings are in the most collaborative sort of set of defaults, right? And actually, as data controllers, we're kind of going, well, we don't want people to collaborate, but not everybody to collaborate. And it's again that example you give of, you've shared a link with me, which means I can access it, but then I forward your email to somebody else. They can also access it just because they've got the link. So
exactly. And don't forget, in the context of Copilot, when we're looking at AI tools, Copilot can access everything you have access to. So if things have been overshared with you accidentally, you may not necessarily know, but Copilot may be able to go and find them. So it's really important we get that tidied up as well. So understanding what the settings are, probably putting some more restrictions in place to make that more sensible would be a good starting point. And then actually we need to go a little bit wider on that. We can look at data sharing on mobile devices. So this is around, we've got people's personal devices. It's so simple. I can download the SharePoint app onto my personal phone and I can access all my data. And then are there any restrictions in place to actually stop me from copying that into personal apps that I use, a Dropbox or something like that? So actually we need to look at that as well as part of this. And then I think finally, just looking at guest access, how we collaborate, and you mentioned it, we collaborate a lot, not just internally, but externally as well. And Microsoft are constantly releasing kind of more modern ways of how we can actually share with people outside our organization. So again, as part of that and the assessment, we'll look at where you're currently set up as a baseline and then suggest some recommendations for improvement.
Excellent. So step 2 really is housekeeping, isn't it? It's that we've done the audit in step 1, the assessment step. Then we come into step 2, and what we're doing is we're just tidying up. It's going into that, like the garage or the wardrobe that you've been dreading looking at for ages, and it's just kind of cleaning the baselines.
Exactly.
Then step 3 is looking at some technical controls. So putting things in place, and it's important to say that with everything we're talking about here, these are free tools in most versions of 365, including sort of business premium, which probably 80% of our clients use.
Yeah.
So these are controls that we can now just turn on, that aren't turned on by default. So tell us a bit about those technical controls, and then I think we've got some examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some examples we'll step you through, but in essence here, we sort of done the foundations in stage 2. We've got the basics done. Stage 3 here is looking at the technical controls we can implement. So this is mainly around how do we protect the data, not just the location it lives in. So to give you an example of that, in stage 2, we might have, let's say we've created a brand new finance site, and we've got all our finance data into that, and we know the permissions are all lovely and we're happy with that. What happens if someone accidentally moves a document into a common area that everyone has access to? You know, that's an example here. We've got an accidental oversharing. It could also be, you know, malicious oversharing, where people are sending stuff outside the organisation as well.
So we talk on the screen about 3 things. Let's look at those three things. And we're talking about email labelling, document labelling, and data loss prevention policies. Those are big words, but I got quite excited when we implemented this at Ramsac, because this is the stuff that keeps me awake at night. So we've got some good examples here of, so we turn this on in our 365 tenants. So this is me starting an email from me to James with some upcoming pay increase information. So what I like, so this is an example of, I use Outlook for Mac, so it might look slightly different to Outlook on Windows, but the concept is the same. What you can see on the screen here is I'm sending this confidential email to James. I don't want to risk accidentally sending the wrong file to the wrong person. We've all done it, haven't we? You know, Microsoft autocomplete. I think I'm sending it to James as a colleague here at Ramsac. I've accidentally sent it to James, who's a client down the road, or you know, or I've thought of one customer and sent it to another customer, and I'm attaching a confidential document, and I don't want you to be able to forward that to your friends and family or other people in the organisation. So when I start to send this email, I click on sensitivity, and then we've created these sensitivity labels. Now, these are bespoke, aren't they?
These are bespoke to Ramsac, but what we tend to do is actually we can tailor these on a client-by-client basis, depending on what your requirements are. So these are all labels, and behind each of these labels is a set of permissions, effectively. So if we have something that's got internal only, that means only people at Ramsac can open that email or that document. So that's just quite a generic label that we can apply to comments.
You've got to be logged into your Microsoft, to your Ramsac 365 tenant in order to be able to see that email.
Exactly.
And then we've added, like, so I got kind of all the labels, if you like HR, directors only, finance users only, and then confidential just means only the person that I've actually sent the email to, right?
Exactly.
And this works really, really effectively. So I send this file to you, and you think, oh, I'd like to work on this offline. You forward this email to your own Gmail account. You can't see it in Gmail account.
And I can't see it, exactly.
And the beauty of it, so this stops accidental oversharing, but also stops, and most oversharing, as I said, is just lack of thought, right? You accidentally forwarded it to somebody, but it does stop that malicious sharing, and it protects that email. If you suddenly go rogue and leave the business,
absolutely,
you can't access it. So that's kind of email labeling, but we've got exactly the same sort of functionality in a document as well, haven't we?
We've got exactly the same. So same principle here, that when you're creating the document, you can go in and you can pick a label that you want to apply to it. And again, just like email, the label travels with the document. So in that example, where if I move something in SharePoint from a sensitive area to a common area, that label will travel with it and then prevent access. Equally, if that leaves 365 and I send it externally, or if I try and put that on my personal laptop or something like that, that label will then travel with that document and prevent access.
And I think this is really important. We often get calls on our help desk from people saying, oh, this key salesperson is leaving, and I think they downloaded our client data, or I think they're sending some files to themselves. What I love about this, just to underline the point that you've already made, actually, James, is the label lives with the document. So let's just say, and you've been here about 20 years, so I don't think you're going to go rogue, but let's say you went rogue, you got access to a load of, let's just say the day before you resign, you send emails to you send a load of files to say your a USB drive or a personal laptop, something like that. It means once I've locked you out of your 365 tenant, you can't access this, can you? Even if you put this physically, saved a file to a USB key and taken it home, I can still stop you accessing it.
Exactly. If it's got the internal only, what will happen is I will try and open that file, and because my account's been disabled, it will prompt me to log in with my email address. At that point, it then prevents access. So that is the kind of the power behind labels as well.
Super exciting. I mean, I found this as as somebody who is responsible for data in our organisation. If I look at our data breach logs, it's always accidental. It's always, oh God, I attached the wrong file to the wrong client, and this just stops that, doesn't it? So I this is really powerful. And then tell us about sort of the data loss prevention stuff.
So data loss prevention is just a way of saying, how do we stop our data leaking outside the organisation, whether that be accidental or malicious? So this is a really simple example of something we've set up here at Ramsac, and it sort of carries on with your point you were making, Dan, about it's very easy to write an email, attach a document, and accidentally send it to the wrong person because it just auto-completed here. So as a way to try and help us here at Ramsac, what we've done is we've set up a rule which says if I'm sending something external and it's got an attachment, what it's going to do is it's going to pop up with this tooltip at the top here. And that is the warning message to say, you're going to send something externally, are you sure? And if I do want to do that, I then have to override the message and then I can send it.
So it's not foolproof, but it's a check and balance, isn't it?
Exactly that. It doesn't stop me from sending it, but it prompts me as just a way to help me as well.
And you can take it a level further, can't you, in terms of setting up rules that detect that an email might contain sensitive information like credit cards, passport details,
exactly,
and prevent that from being sent.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. So that was stage 3. That was turning on technical controls, which just further reduce that risk of accidental oversharing or mitigate the risk of data breaches. And as I say, all of that is available just to be configured in fairly standard 365 tenants.
Absolutely. If you've got Business Premium, which is such a common license, you've got all of this functionality we've shown you so far.
We just need to turn it on.
Exactly.
Excellent. So step 4 in our 5-step process goes to the next level. This is automation and enforcement. Now, this is where we step outside of Business Premium, right?
Exactly. So what we're talking about here is what we just demonstrated is manual labelling. So this relies on human behaviour to actually go in and label those documents. Now, we might want to go and say, well, actually, how do we then automate and enforce that? And this is where, yes, you're right, we have to step outside Business Premium. And from a licensing perspective, we're either looking at sort of Microsoft E3 plus add-ons, Microsoft E5, or bolting on some add-ons to Business Premium to get there. So there's a cost implication here of getting that. But the logic is actually, if we can automatically enforce labels, that relies, less reliance on human behaviour and people forgetting to do it. And there might be some real common use cases here. It might be we've got the finance site, to pick on finance again, and we know that every document that goes in there should have a finance label, or anything saved in the common SharePoint site should have an internal only label. Can we set up a rule just to automatically do that for us? So that's what it allows you to do. Equally, you might go and say, well, actually, the labelling at this point is a choice. We want to actually enforce that. So any document created should automatically have a label. We might want to prompt that behaviour. Now, that comes with the change in working as well. So we have to sort of step through that journey. But actually, if we're going to sort of really use labels to the full power, maybe we want to look at that as well.
Excellent.
And then finally, just to mention around, do we want to do more stringent data loss prevention policies? That example I showed, just sending an attachment to an external user, is quite a simple one, but do we want to set up more sophisticated rules to do exactly what you said, Dan, like to pick up? Do we want to say, let's stop credit card information from being sent out, let's stop personally identifiable information, so NHS numbers, passport numbers? What we showed you in step 3 doesn't prevent the email or document from being sent, but what we can do here in step 4, if we want to, is actually start to tighten up security and prevent that being sent in the first place.
So really powerful for those clients that routinely process sensitive information. So we've got a lot of clients in sort of financial services, recruitment, HR consultancy, that kind of thing. This is a really powerful tool for those.
Exactly. Yes.
Excellent. Thanks. So step 5 is ongoing maintenance. So this sounds less sexy than steps 1 to 4, but let's talk about ongoing maintenance. Why is this important?
So I think from our view, data security, it's a continuous process. It's not a one and done job is what we're trying to say here. So those steps we've just outlined, they may take, depending on the level of work, they may take months to get to that point. You know, a lot of work is going to go into actually setting things up more securely. So this step here is about how do we make sure we stay at that stage and we don't slip back into old habits as well. And this could take the form in kind of different places. We could look at actually, do we want to do regular permission reviews? There's a thing that we know called permission creep. So this is where you've got joiners, leavers, movers, someone changes a role, they get different permissions. Do we ever go back and tidy up the old permissions on that as well? So that's just an example of actually keeping on top of it.
It's that really essential stuff, isn't it? So, you know, to go back to the analogy of cleaning out that cupboard or cleaning out the garage that you've put off for ages, it's brilliant when it's done. You do a load of legwork to get it in order. The only way to avoid having to do all of that legwork again is just to keep it tidy.
Absolutely.
So this is the equivalent of, you know, making sure that your kids always put their wellies back on the right shelf. So it's the fact that we don't just sit on it and assume it's done. We have to then probably once a quarter rerun those tools, rerun those updates, and then it's a much quicker job just to keep it tidy.
Exactly that. Exactly. And you know, we might be adapting to kind of new ways of working in that time. Maybe we've had a new SharePoint site that we've created, or maybe there's some extra teams we've created. Do the label get applied to those teams, or do we actually need to double check the permissions on that as well?
Actively at the moment, there's a new feature in Copilot that's changed the way it's looking at something. Microsoft have released something new.
Exactly. So do we need to revisit that? And as part of that, maybe we need to update our controls. Maybe actually there's new labels that we want to look at. Is there something that we can create, or actually is there some new data loss prevention policies that we think actually would be beneficial to the way that we're working now? So I think it's important, actually, as you say, let's keep on top of it. Maybe quarterly, could be 6 monthly, but there needs to be something in place to make sure that things don't slide back.
Excellent. So the eagle-eye will have spotted that in our little diagram we had our 5 steps, but then there was this overarching sort of circle around which you possibly couldn't see on the screen, but it talks about written policies. So this is about governance. Tell me a bit about this step, James.
So I think for us, written policies underpin everything we've just talked about. And what I mean by that is technology should be in place to enforce the policy. It doesn't replace it. And what I mean about it is, tends to be the most successful projects that we do are the ones where someone's got a very solid written policy in place already, and the data controls are mirroring what we're saying and enforcing that policy.
It's about the tail not wagging the dog, isn't it? It's about the written policy is about the business has to determine, first of all, what good needs to look like in their context.
Yes.
And then we need to write the tools that support that aspiration, rather than IT enforcing all the controls and then end users going, well, those controls have just completely broken the way we need to work in this organisation.
Exactly. And actually, it's really important to have written policies in place to meet certain compliance requirements. We know for things like GDPR, ISO 27001, you need to have policies in place to actually back up what you're doing as well. And actually, for us, a written policy, it's there to set some clear expectations around the way that you're expected to work with data as part of a business. We see that overlap with things as well as cyber essentials. You know, each year when we come to do renewals, we know there's new things that we need to look at as well. And really, just to follow up on screen, the policy, it should be there about encouraging best practices and the way that people should work as well. And really, all of that should help minimise risk and unintentional sort of data loss or disclosure as well. So all of that is really, really important. And written policies is a continuous thing as well that should be reviewed. Again, it's not
Keeping them up to date.
exactly.
And it's that thing, isn't it? There is no way you can get around, no IT system can get around the fact that you should train your staff. You should train your staff well on what's required and what's expected. But equally, training staff once at induction and then expecting them to remember that in 2 years' time is naive. So this is best of both worlds. We set out the standards, we train people on them, and then we put the technology controls in place to stop them making a mistake. I think I've said it before, but we're seeing examples of data loss every single day on our IT help desk. 90% of the time, it's actually not malicious, is it? It's accidental.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of the phone calls we get is, "Oh my goodness, can you recall this email because I've just sent the wrong thing to the wrong person." So the technical controls just kind of it's another level of filter, isn't it, that people have to pass through.
Exactly.
Excellent. So that is our data security journey, really. And I think it's worth just saying that from our own perspective, there were some real key learnings when we implemented that. We're not going to go through this in detail, so I'm very conscious of time. But there's a journey that we have to take clients on in helping end users understand why we're putting these controls in place and how to use these controls. But this kind of all sums itself up in this framework. I think we've covered the sort of the in half an hour what probably takes. I mean, this is several days' work to work on with a client and implement, but hopefully that's a useful high-level overview. So James, thanks for taking us through that. Hope that was useful. If you've got anything you'd like to talk about in terms of where you might be on this 5-step process and how we can help you step through it on a sort of a handheld basis, then please do reach out to us. Thanks very much. Have a great morning.
Thank you.